What if I told you that one of the most dangerous creatures in Greek mythology was also one of its wisest teachers? A being with the body of a horse and the torso of a man. Half instinct, half intellect. Half beast, half philosopher. The Centaur. Were they savage monsters of the forest, or enlightened masters who trained the greatest heroes of Greece? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and misunderstood beings in Greek mythology, the Centaur. And by the end of this story, you may realize they weren't just monsters. They were a mirror of humanity itself. In Greek mythology, a centaur is a hybrid creature, the upper body of a human fused to the lower body of a horse. But unlike other mythical hybrids, like the Minotaur or the Sphinx, centaurs weren't just rare monsters hiding in labyrinths or deserts. They were a tribe. They lived in the wild regions of Thessaly, particularly around Mount Pelion. They roamed forests, mountains, and caves. And in most myths, they were known for something very specific: wildness. They were impulsive, aggressive, and often driven by uncontrollable desires, especially when it came to wine and violence. But here's where things get interesting. Not all centaurs were the same. The origin of the centaurs is as strange as their appearance. According to myth, the first centaur was born from a king named Ixion. Ixion was a mortal king who committed a terrible crime. He murdered his own father-in-law. Yet, somehow, he was forgiven and invited to Mount Olympus by Zeus himself. But Ixion made a fatal mistake. He lusted after Hera, the queen of the gods. To test him, Zeus created a cloud shaped like Hera, named Nephele. Ixion, consumed by desire, mated with the cloud. From this unnatural union came a strange offspring, Centaurus. Centaurus later bred with wild mares in Thessaly, and from them the race of centaurs was born. Right from their origin, centaurs symbolized something unnatural, a blending of civilization and raw animal instinct. And that duality defines everything about them. Most centaurs in Greek myths are not gentle creatures. They are known for drunkenness, violence, and lack of self-control. The most famous example of this is the battle at the wedding of Pirithous. Pirithous, king of the Lapiths, invited the centaurs to his wedding feast. It was meant to be a celebration of peace between humans and centaurs. But there was one problem: wine. The centaurs were not used to drinking it. When they did, they lost all control. One centaur attempted to abduct the bride, and chaos erupted. This event, known as the Centauromachy, became one of the most famous symbolic battles in Greek art. The Lapiths and centaurs fought brutally. Heroes like Theseus joined the battle. Many centaurs were killed or driven away. But this wasn't just a physical fight. To the ancient Greeks, this battle symbolized something deeper: the struggle between civilization and savagery. Reason versus instinct. Order versus chaos. The centaurs represented the wild, untamed side of nature and of humanity. But here's the twist. Among all these violent beings, there was one who stood completely apart. And his name was Chiron. Unlike the other centaurs, Chiron was not savage. He was wise, gentle, immortal. And his origin was different. Chiron was the son of the Titan Cronus and the sea nymph Philyra. When Cronus transformed himself into a horse to escape detection, Chiron was born as a horse-man hybrid. But instead of becoming wild like the others, Chiron became a master of medicine, music, hunting, prophecy, and martial arts. He lived on Mount Pelion and became the teacher of some of the greatest heroes in Greek mythology, including Achilles, Asclepius, Jason, Heracles. Think about that for a moment. The greatest warriors and healers of Greece were trained by a centaur. Chiron represents something extraordinary. He represents balance, the ability to master your instincts rather than be controlled by them. The Greeks were not just telling monster stories. They were exploring psychology. Centaurs symbolize the eternal conflict inside every human being, the rational mind and the primal urge, the philosopher and the animal. Most centaurs failed that test. Chiron passed it, and in doing so, he became one of the most respected figures in mythology, even among the gods. One day, the great hero Heracles, also known as Hercules, visited the cave of a centaur named Pholus. What began as a peaceful meeting quickly turned into chaos. The scent of wine attracted other centaurs from the mountains. Tempers rose. Weapons were drawn. Heracles, armed with arrows dipped in the deadly venom of the Hydra, began firing at the attacking centaurs. But then, something terrible happened. One poisoned arrow struck Chiron. And this is where the tragedy begins. The venom of the Hydra was incurable. It burned like fire. It spread endlessly. And no medicine, not even Chiron's own, could heal it. But Chiron was immortal. He could not die. Imagine that for a moment. An immortal being suffering endlessly. Unable to heal, unable to die, trapped in eternal pain. This is one of the deepest tragedies in all of Greek mythology. Chiron's suffering became unbearable. He withdrew into isolation, consumed by pain. The wise teacher of heroes, the master of medicine, could not cure himself. Eventually, he made an extraordinary decision. He chose to give up his immortality. According to myth, Chiron offered his immortality to free Prometheus, who was being eternally punished by Zeus. Zeus accepted the exchange. Chiron was finally allowed to die, released from his agony. And in honor of his wisdom and sacrifice, Zeus placed him among the stars. Many scholars believe Chiron became the constellation Sagittarius. Though some traditions connect Sagittarius to another centaur, the symbolic meaning remains powerful. The centaur, half animal, half philosopher, now aiming an arrow toward the heavens. It's no longer a symbol of chaos. It becomes a symbol of higher purpose. The constellation Sagittarius represents adventure, knowledge, freedom, the search for truth. Notice how different that is from the savage centaurs of the forest. Over time, the image of the centaur evolved. In early myths, they were warnings, creatures driven by uncontrolled desire. But through Chiron, they became teachers of balance. In modern astrology, Chiron is even considered a wounded healer, representing deep personal pain that transforms into wisdom. It's fascinating. A creature once feared as wild and dangerous becomes a symbol of spiritual growth. The Centauromachy, the battle between Lapiths and Centaurs, was carved into the Parthenon in Athens. To the Greeks, it represented civilization overcoming barbarism. Later, during the Renaissance, artists painted centaurs in more complex ways, sometimes violent, sometimes romantic. And today, centaurs appear in fantasy novels, video games, films, and role-playing worlds. But here's the important thing. Modern fantasy often portrays them as noble forest guardians or wise warriors. that image traces directly back to Chiron. Even in psychology, the centaur remains powerful. It represents the struggle between instinct and reason, between our animal nature and our higher mind. And perhaps that's why the myth has survived for thousands of years. If we look beyond the myth, the centaur is not just a creature, it is a metaphor. The horse represents power, desire, speed, instinct. The human torso represents intellect, morality, and consciousness. Together, they form a question. Can we control our instincts, or will they control us? Most centaurs failed. Chiron succeeded. And in doing so, he teaches us something timeless. Wisdom is not the absence of pain. Strength is not the absence of instinct. True mastery is balance. From savage wedding battles to immortal teachers of heroes to stars in the night sky, the centaur is one of the most layered and symbolic beings in all of Greek mythology. It embodies chaos and civilization, violence and wisdom, mortality and immortality. And perhaps that's why the story still resonates today, because every human being carries a centaur within them, the wild side and the wise side. The real question is, which one do you choose to follow?